big expression in business. It says that when an elephant sits down, get out of its way. And one of the things you'll notice is a lot of startups being swallowed by where all capital's going, right? Anthropic, OpenAI, etc. And there is like, if Anthropic climbs one rung up the distribution chain, if you think of like, you have chips at one end and then use applications on the other and models and stuff in the middle, they just move up a little bit. So NA10, as we know, had a meteoric rise. It was incredible to see. Meg.com blew up. And one of the reasons for that was as we all know, AI. You could do incredible things now by connecting AI to various different apps. What was interesting at that point, the play, it could code, yes, but the main application was it powered your automation workflows, right? But essentially, what's happened here is Anthropic climbed one level up that rung, one level higher, where it's now doing the software, and it kind of enveloped probably 90% of the use cases that we used to use these automation platforms for. And I think there's a core point we have to touch on in the startup economy, Nick, before we move on to, which I think is very closely, linked to this routines thing, which is you have to be so careful that what you're doing isn't in Malaysia has the cross lines of what these big companies are doing, because it's so easy for them to move. They are effectively going to pivot to the location where they can generate money. And the reality is anything creating software now is getting commoditized. So you have to be so freaking careful. Either they will take all of your market share, which to be fair, they have the audience and distribution and they're powerful and they get it, or it's a big risk. So I think that was a big thing about lots of startups basically just being ChatGPT wrappers initially. But I think that's a trend that's only increasing over time. So it's going to be an interesting one to see.
Yeah, definitely. I find it funny because not only do we use their technology in order to build our own products, but they get all of the usage data on how we're using their technology to build our own products. And so they get literally the first line view into what is going on under the hood. Hey, we're getting a lot of API requests from XYZ service. Let's take a peek at like what's actually going on. Then they just get to copy and paste that and build that into their own infrastructure. So we see that with Lovable, for instance. I saw a post on X the other day about this. Or sorry, I think it was Bolt that made a post about this. It was their CEO. And he said something like, we've known that we're in the crosshairs for a while. This is in response to a leaked like app builder tool for Claude. Oh, yeah. He said, I know that we've been in the crosshairs for a while. And we've been looking at ways to, both diversify the model inference and then build our own models that are like highly application specific to avoid it. But after a while, you do wonder, like, if Anthropic has the best models, and then they also have unparalleled insight into what every one of these smaller companies is doing, what does that mean for like longevity? If everything is a commodity, the only thing that is not the commodity just yet is the model intelligence itself. They're trying to get to the point where it is, but like that's really the only like development left, right? Because it's like, well, you're not going to develop some proprietary software approach to like building apps or whatever that Anthropic doesn't have, because they'll just launch Mythos and then Mythos will be able to do it a million times better just organically out of the box. 100%. So it's like if that's really the only commodity, is that really the only game worth playing? Should you and I just drop everything that we do and start our own little AI lab company?
That's yeah. I love that. Yeah. The AI for gym goers and deal crackers. I like that. I think it's got potential there. No, you're right on because look at this. Realistically, Bolt and Lovable, what can they do? They can make it cheaper. Okay. Which doesn't make sense, because if you're building apps, it's not enough of a competitive differentiator and you don't want to race to the bottom. You can make it faster, maybe, or can you improve the quality matrix? The other thing they can do is make it easier. In other words, which I think is what you see Lovable do. They say, great, well, look, let us take some of that complexity from the connected workload and do that. We'll take the Superbase and we'll build our own table system. We'll take the model. So they're trying to strip the complexity for the first level user. And that's cool. That won't be enough long-term though, because the thing is, Anthropic, day by day, keeps adding in and making it simpler. They make it better and they make it simpler. And if we're honest, if you go on Product Hunt right now, the biggest trending category you'll see is vibe coding. It's apps like Bolt, Lovable, all the other guys. Number 2 is voice dictation, interestingly.
Nice.
But isn't that fascinating? And I can see why Claude would do that. I mean, AI Studio did that. I thought that was cool, but they added a little bit more friction, and they did it incredibly well with the app building thing.
That little side panel? Is that what you mean? Like where you could see it build it in real time?
Yeah, well, no. In the AI Studio, you mean?
Yeah. I've used the AI Studio like once or twice. I'm just kind of curious Because I
It
haven't
was
actually
basically
looked too much
just
into it.
like Bolt and Livable. They're
Wow,
all kind of do
really?
the same sort of thing.
That's a
Um,
Google drop
it,
too. Oof.
the tough one though, bro, is when you say, "What's the difference?" You could point to one or two things, but ultimately, if we're really honest, how do you differentiate that whole system? There's a vibe thing of like, look, how good is just the actual end product, which is cool, but it's like, okay. Here's the thing: us being different today is one question. Us being
Mhm.
different in 6 months is a completely different question. So we want a business with what is known as longevity, so we can still, you know, do our pizza parties and Pepsi Max and our cups and stuff in 6 months' time. So what does that look like? You genuinely have to think now. Where does Anthropic move, and what does that mean for our model? Do you know what I mean? So it's a crazy question, but they all have to answer this.
Okay,
You want to be enabled by it.
and this is a question for you, Jack, the main differentiators then, the UX, is that really just the core thing? I mean, if we're at essentially equivalent levels of intelligence and capability with these models, hypothetically, assuming that, Anthropic doesn't drop Mythos tomorrow or Spud doesn't hit, OpenAI, and it's just all the same models, isn't UX the only difference between it? Like, isn't this the most powerful potentially time to be a UX designer? Because if you can design a UX just 1% better than, Lovables or Bolts, everybody's just going to flood to you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think UI, UX is key. I'm trying to think of other commoditized markets that I've seen. And okay, let's take the UK energy market, the most exciting topic that we're ever going to talk about on this podcast. Okay, effectively, energy is a good example of a commodity, right? Who cares where the hell I get it from? All I want is my bill to be low as possible, and I want as little contact with you as possible. That's generally what it boils down to. But yeah, we had the rise of a company called Octopus Energy in the UK. And they did a couple of things quite well. First of all, they had better systems internally, right? They simplified meter readings and they gamified it a tiny bit. But the best thing that they did is they built their brand around a particular movement, which was around at the time clean and green energy. That was the big thing that they did. And the mission resonated. So people were actually okay paying slightly more for, I think, what they built this kind of like mini brand around it, right? Which was really impressive. So the other thing to consider here, I think, as well, is that you cannot do all things very well. I don't care how big you are. I think you have to pick your divine area of expertise. And if you do have a company that says, look, we don't care about coding, or the only thing we care about is beautiful apps that work, I think there is a level of specialization. And let's also be fair, Anthropic's not going to reserve its best. Well, it might do. That is an idea. They could just not give the best models publicly, but realistically, they're going to do that. So unless they want to be a loss leader, there probably is some level of specialization and people do like choice in the market. But at the same time, if everybody's in the Claude ecosystem, it's definitely going to make an impact.
Yeah, this reminds me of that one guy that was on a bunch of podcasts a while ago, and he's got this big long beard and he kind of walks around barefoot, and then his whole thing is like taste. Now, I don't know his name, but you know who I'm talking about, right?
I know who you're talking about.
And so this is basically the same idea if you think about it. It's a commoditization of everything but taste. I mean, in the future, we're going to, we have galaxy brain robots that can build whatever the heck we want. Like, the only differentiator is like my taste and the difference between my taste and yours. And so UX can be seen as a version of taste. There's like the sanitized UX designs that fit as many people as humanly possible. And I like to think of that as like a one size fits all glove, right? Like, it'll technically fit everybody with big hands or small hands, but it's not going to fit them really well. And then you also have these like kind of niches carved out for like specialized tastes where it's like, okay, like this is like the small, and this one fits people with like really long fingernails, and this one fits. And so I think it's almost indisputable that like if you and I were to start this stacked AI just for the sake of discussion, we'd no doubt get crushed by just the sheer differences in compute and capability between us and Anthropic.
But we'd get crushed, they'd get crushed.
Well, yeah, I mean, with our boulder shoulders, who knows? But with for a blissful fleeting moment in time, we may have like a taste advantage, kind of like Midjourney and then like Stable Diffusion. If you think back to like the image generation market a while ago, Midjourney crushed, and it wasn't necessarily because they're the best image generation models. They just could like fine tune them through low rank adaptation and a couple other things to like open and generate specific styles that were like very in demand.
I think that's also a lot to do with Higgsfield, honestly. Because
yeah, for sure.
If you're honest, it's nothing you can't do with an API call. But there's just something about the way they've laid that out and make it look really good that's just fun to use.